When I left the Pentagon, I went to Command 2505 in the 82nd. Grenada suddenly popped up, and I say suddenly because we had no warning about it. I had been over at JSOC. Of course, I had all the clearances and all, so I routinely would go over there and chat them up and see what was going on. So I had a little advance notice that they were concerned about this island. But then it suddenly became an issue when the Grenadian Revolutionary Force under Hudson Austin shot Maurice Bishop, assassinated, who was the president of Grenada, prime minister or whatever he was. Anyway, the head. And at that point, the JCS decided we were going to have to take over the place because it was clear the Cubans were going to come in. Grenada was ideally located that if it were a training location for the Cubans, they could easily hop over into Central America. You recall at that time, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras were all heating up and big issues, the Sandinistas and all. So Grenada suddenly took on significance. Also, we had a medical college down there, the Grenadian U.S. It was basically an expatriate U.S. medical school. And those students were phoning back to mom and dad saying, hey, we got a problem here. We're under guard. You know, we're being told we'll be shot if we go out at night, blah, blah, blah. All this generated suddenly into a requirement to take over Grenada. And I'm speaking now sort of out of my direct knowledge as a participant and my direct knowledge from what people told me that were at that level. The initial plan for the capture of Grenada and Point Celine was generated immediately after President Reagan's speech about Grenada, year plus before the event itself took place. At that time, the JCS passed out the same mission to two different organizations. First, to LANTCOM, who was responsible for the general area, and then to JSOC as a special ops mission. But they didn't tell either organization that the other organization was working it. So both JSOC and LANTCOM began to independently generate this plan for the invasion of Grenada. And then when the mission finally came out, they woke up and said, hey, we got LANTCOM, we got JSOC here, going to do this. And then, oh, by the way, we're going to add 18th Airborne Corps to this deal. And so this is all within a 10-day period. And so on D-10, the 82nd Airborne Planner, our G3, visits LANTCOM. And of course, LANTCOM is introduced for the first time to both JSOC and Corps 82nd. So there's this, you know, who's going to do what to whom? Well, this gets up to the JCS. And General Vesey, who is by this time the chairman, is concerned that these guys are stumbling all over themselves. And there was a person in the tank briefing that told me about this directly. So I'm pretty sure it's absolutely true. He said that Vesey went up to the map of Grenada and he drew a line halfway across the island. And he said, okay, LANTCOM, you're responsible from the top to this line. JSOC, you're responsible for this to that line. And so that's how they divided the work between the two. And the JSOC mission was to take the airfield, to repatriate Paul Schoon, who was the British representative, and to rescue the the students in their dorm. Well, at that time, the only known location for the students was Grand Anse Beach. We didn't know about True Blue Campus. What we also didn't know was that the president of the medical school was in Connecticut on a fundraising deal, and he was talking to the students on the phone all the time. And state never told us that the president was talking to the students. We could have got huge intel and learned about all these the 2 additional campuses that we didn't know about till we got there. But anyway, that didn't happen. So anyway, bottom line is Marines are going to take it from the north. JSOC's going to take it on the south. Corps is going to come in with 82nd behind, and they'll relieve the Rangers and JSOC, and JSOC will depart. 82nd will take over, and Corps will manage the whole thing. Lantcom will then depart and do its thing. Whole thing will be under control of the Navy, Admiral McDonald. And by the way, you may recall that the Marine barracks had just been blown up in Beirut. And so the Marine force that was going to be used for Grenada was the one that was going to relieve Beirut. So they had to get them out of Grenada very quickly to get them over to Beirut. So this was all kind of background noise. Navy woke up and discovered it had no communications with JSOC. JSOC had no communications with the Navy. You're bringing in Corps. Navy has no communications with Corps. So, I know what we'll do. We'll come up with an Army Deputy Commander. It'll be H. Norman Schwarzkopf, CG of the 24th ID at Stewart. So they grabbed Schwarzkopf and put him on a boat with McDonald. He has no radios. He's in charge of himself. He can't talk to anybody. So you have this kind of clowns in action thing going on. Very confusing. The Rangers were originally programmed to go in at like 0400, just before daylight, so they could take advantage of the dark, NVGs, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the Navy says, we can't land. These are old charts, nav charts. We can't afford to risk the bottoms. We want to postpone till 0800. So McDonald, being a Navy guy, says, hey, postpone till 0800. Well, that puts the Rangers jumping in broad daylight. You can see right behind you on that picture. That's the Rangers jumping in, broad daylight. So that becomes less than wonderful. The Marines have there are 2 elements to the Marine approach because of the nature of Grenada's geography. One is on the east side at Pearls. That's captured very quickly by Lieutenant Colonel E. Toole Smith. He's got that in hand. The Navy, the Marine approach on the western side is much more difficult. Very rugged terrain. They got to get their big Amtraks and their tanks and roll down this very narrow, constricted road. And there's occasional fire that slows them up, so they don't get to Schoon in time to really relieve the SEALs. The SEALs are in deep kimchi. They got a small SEAL unit in there. Austin's forces have clamped right around Schoon's house very tightly, and the SEALs are actually in deep trouble. That's when you get the story of the Navy SEAL picking up the phone and calling the TOC at Bragg, which is absolutely correct. The AT&T phone system was working fine, and he just dialed up using his credit card, the JSOC TOC, who then had a good satellite shot to the AC-130. And he just relayed fire control through that way, and that's what kept him under. That's absolutely true story. At any rate, Saline is captured. There's about 2 days worth of heavy shooting with the Cubans, because this engineer brigade is actually I would call it a paramilitary army force. I mean, they got machine guns, they got rifles, and they know how to use them. They're not odds and sods kind of soldiers. They put a pretty good fight. They were in a defended position on a hill, which gave them an advantage. Delta guys actually dealt with it primarily use of snipers. They were touching people at 300-400 meters very effectively. Bottom line is, there's a lot of confusion. However, the airfield is taken, and Colonel Hagler, 2nd Ranger Battalion, does an assault into Grandance Beach to the campus there. A couple gunship get shot down, a RH-53 gets shot down, and they rescue the students, bring them back. And then the students say, oh, by the way, what about our buddies that blew at True Blue campus. Huh? True Blue? Never heard of that. Yeah. Well, it's over here right on the map. Well, now Calvigny Barracks. We got to gin up a big operation to go to Calvigny, which was occupied, we believe, by the Cubans, and then next to it is the True Blue campus. So that operation goes off. It's kind of mixed. Lose a couple birds there. They crash into each other. There's a lot of fire. Anyway, we rescue the hostages. At this point, the Navy feels it's basically done its job. It's got both the east and the west side. I relieve Colonel Smith up at Pearls. He gets back on his boats and goes off to Beirut. A Navy departs. Corps comes in. 2nd and 3rd Brigades of the 82nd, which I'm the third part of the 3rd Brigade. And we then start to what we would now call coin operations, where we got to go out into the countryside as a whole, root out the bad guys from the good guys, bring law and order back to it, and then most importantly, try to reconstitute a government. Grenada is 8 islands. So we were responsible for all 8 of those islands. The key other one, place called Carriacou, just to the north. And then, of course, Grenada itself. Grenada itself is extremely rugged. I mean, it's a gigantic volcano in the middle, covered with jungle, and then this tiny little reasonably level area all around the perimeter, which is where everybody lives. Up in the mountains, it's all little 3 and 4 house villages and all. 2nd Brigade departs back to Fort Bragg. 3rd Brigade is left with having to basically clear and hold the whole island and rebuild the Grenadian structure. We had with us the Caribbean Peacekeeping Force, which was a euphemistic name for basically all the cops from all of the Caribbean islands, led primarily by the Jamaicans, who were very good, and the Bermudians, who were also quite good, and then I would say significantly lesser forces from the lesser islands. They were as much thieves as the Grenadian folks were, so we had a problem there, but we worked it out. My battalion in particular was evolved out. Eventually, 2 other battalions in the brigade left with the brigade headquarters, and I was left as what Corps called Task Force Grenada, which was an organization based on my battalion plus engineers, MPs, quartermaster, etc. And our job was to train up the Caribbean Peacekeeping Force so they could take over our job of patrolling. And I should mention before that, in the weeks prior, we had to go out into all the interior. And because of the nature of the ground, as I mentioned, we'd have a squad in one village and a squad in another and a platoon headquarters over there with radio relay, and very spread out all over the place. I mean, over, 100 square miles, and no command control other than what the leadership brought with them at that point. I mean, I had squad leaders really bright. They'd go in, they know how to talk to the people, and they were rooting out the bad guys, and, they were suddenly tremendous sense of pride in what they were doing. Hey, American flag and the Grenadians are coming up, just glomming all over how much we love you, was very impactful for the troops themselves and also for the leadership. They could see the value of the small unit training that we had done before at Bragg, and the power down and the delegation of authority paid huge dividends up there. So that was very fulfilling in that sense, but it also gave us a good insight into, like I say, coin operations. We learned all sorts of things on the fly that we never trained for, but because the flexible mind of these guys, they could adjust to it. They became, I had a lieutenant at Carriacou who we laughingly called the Czar of Carriacou, Bob Skurlock. And they thought he was the new government. he was up there, and they were coming up to him. They wanted wedding ceremonies. They wanted him to adjudicate property disputes and, basically be the judge and jury for them because he was the first law and order that they had in several years. And that was representative throughout. One sidebar story, Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, as you know, is not a British holiday. It's an American holiday. Well, there had been publicity amongst our troops about Thanksgiving. We're going to have Thanksgiving dinners, blah, blah. Division is going to fly in turkeys for us, etc. Well, the locals started hearing about this. And unbeknownst to us, they went out all over the place. They were on their boats, planes, whatever. And they collected all these things that they thought was part of our Thanksgiving meal. And you have to understand, all of our troops, my whole battalion plus, is scattered, held a breakfast all over the island. We're not a cohesive unit at all in that sense. And so every little ville that had 2505 was going to have some kind of Thanksgiving deal. So our guys did our thing. The Corps brought in mermites, filled full of turkeys from Fort Bragg and turkey meat and all the stuff that went with them. My grade S4 had Dave McNeil had gotten into the captured stocks that the Cubans had left, which was Algerian red wine, white wine, and Cuban cigars. Big warehouses load of them. So he gets all the chow from Fort Bragg and loads it up with the Algerian red and the Cuban cigars and ships it out to all of our various way stations. In our primarily log system was captured Russian trucks. We had captured probably 50, repatriated at Saline, and we distributed them amongst each of the companies. As I recall, each company got 10 trucks. And we used those to basically do the log ops for each of these isolated elements. Well, comes Thanksgiving Day, and our troops are all gathered up out of their mermites. The local Ville head comes up and he says, "We want you to come to the village here, and we have a surprise for you." I'm speaking in general terms, but it applied to all of these locations and gives you an idea of the sincerity the Grenadians had. So our troops had trooped down to the village. Normally they bring all their chow, the mermites, with them because they said it was going to be a dinner sort of a meal thing. And all the village would be assembled. And they'd have these big tables spread out under the trees or on blankets. And, invariably it went something like this. Whoever was the head of the Ville would bring in whoever my senior guy was at that point. And you say, "We don't know anything about your Thanksgiving. It's not part of our tradition, but we understand it's important for you. So therefore it is important for us. And we've brought out the food that we think is your sort of food for this event. But we want you to know that our Thanksgiving was the day you arrived." And follow on, the 24th of October is Thanksgiving Day in Grenada today. It is a federal holiday. Because of my prior connections, I made offline phone calls to a friend of mine in the agency who was working clan ops. And he sent down through a courier in the Bahamas quite a bit of intelligence, which we gave to the division, who was still at Salinas. And they read that, and it was new information for them that they didn't have about personalities, who the personalities were. In some cases, they actually had photographs and a number of other operationally valuable information about them, sort of a targeting list, if you would. So they were able to convert that into actionable intelligence. And the key one was Hudson Austin, the head of the Revolutionary Army, the guy that was responsible for killing Bishop. And we relayed him, they narrowed it down to where he was in the southern part of the island of Carriacou. There's a number of peninsulas that went out on the island, and these were all kind of fancy luxury housing. And he was in one of those. We narrowed it down. And Colonel Scott, the brigade commander, gave me the mission of taking out Austin. So we helicopter in the early morning. Another sidebar story here. I'm landing on this big green lawn next to this fairly luxurious mansion. And I'm getting my troops assembled, and everybody, there's helicopters are landing in different places and moving out. And all of a sudden, coming out of the house is this butler, and he's got this big tray. And he's got a big silver, a real silver tea service and a big jug of cold water. And he says, "Compliments of the madam." He thrusts it at me. You know, I've got my helmet on, I'm on the radio, you know, all this stuff. And this guy's bringing this stuff out. So my mother is Scot, so I'm used to tea. So I set the thing down with him, and I'm on the radio trying to get people organized. And while I'm getting organized, he pours me a cup of tea. And so I'm sitting there, you know, getting C Company around the house, and I'm drinking my tea. And I said, "Thank you very much." And we raced off, but I'll never forget the sight. You know, early morning, this butler in full regalia comes out with his silver tea service, you know, to make sure I'm taken care of and welcoming me to the island. Anyway, we go over to the house, and C Company calls me, and commander says, "Sir, we got a couple of vehicles out here. They got East German plates." This is a new wrinkle. So I call back to Scott, brigade commander, say, "We got East German plates here. I'm not sure we need to go take this place down without clearance from state." And Scott says, "I agree, hold off." So he's on the phone doing his thing. And like 1 minute later, bang, 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 boom. Said, "I forget that, we're going in." We go in. We hold off at that point. We're all around the house now. We're close in tight. And Hudson starts negotiating. And he sends one of his emissaries out and says, "We want guaranteed safe passage out of here, or, you know, we'll shoot the hostages I got." We didn't know the hostages or not, but that's what he said. And then I said, "Okay, we're not negotiating. You either come out of the house or I'm going to blow you to hell." And I had the AC-130 do a low-level pass. Right, this house had a big glass window, kind of like this, looking out on the water. And I had the AC guy come flying across low, like 50 feet off the deck with his guns on that side, just pointing right through the window. And at that point, Austin came out. He said, "Okay, I surrender." And Sergeant Mayo, who was the platoon sergeant in C Company, grabbed him, stripped him, and had him in his underwear on the lawn, and had him all slip cuffed up. And we took him down to the pier that was in front of the house. And a Black Hawk came in, Jesse Johnson from Delta, picked him up. We knew each other, of course, from the past. Said, "Here you go, Jesse." We gave him Hudson Austin, and he flew off, and end of the story.